This is an exciting time in Ohio for the life science industry. More research than ever is occurring here. More life-saving treatments and drugs are being created here from our amazing research institutions. That research is leading to more companies emerging here and staying here in Ohio, employing Ohioans at a high rate of pay. We have companies outside of Ohio investing in the state more than ever. Sarepta Therapeutics, for example, Nationwide Children's Technology, developed here. Sarepta purchased the company, and instead of taking that technology to Boston, they actually came to Ohio. More of that type of thing is possible in this industry, and we're really excited about the opportunity that the life sciences present us today. Appreciate everyone being here. Please consider joining us at our event tomorrow at 11 o'clock. Thank you to Pfizer for the financial support to allow us to do this morning. For other industry representatives, Kate from Sarepta, appreciate you being here as well. So with that, I'll hand it over to Kelly to kick us off with the rest of the program. Thank you.
Thank you, Eddie. Hi, thank you for joining us this morning on a very important topic that's very personal and near and dear to my heart. As Eddie said, my name is Kelly Maynard, and I founded the Little Hercules Foundation about 10 years ago when my 15-year-old son was diagnosed with a progressive terminal muscle wasting disease called Duchenne muscular dystrophy at the age of 5. Today you're going to hear a lot about cell and gene therapies that are not only transforming many rare and life-limiting conditions into manageable chronic conditions, but are also extending and saving lives for patients where there are no other treatment options. There are currently 10 approved cell and gene therapies, but there are over 1,000 of these therapies in the clinical development pipeline according to the FDA. Many of these are being developed right here in Ohio's research hospitals in partnership with Ohio's robust biotechnology and manufacturing industry. So right now, I want to introduce you to an Ohio family that understands personally the impact of the research and the availability of these therapies right here in our state. Unfortunately, the Fritsch family couldn't be with us in person today, but they did record their story for us to share with you. I'd like you to meet Haley and Aggie Fritsch from Pioneer, Ohio, who are living with the diagnosis of spinal muscular atrophy.
Sticky, sticky bubble gum, bubble gum, bubble gum. Sticky bubble gum makes your hand stick to your head. On diagnosis day, we went to Cincinnati Children's and we saw a neurologist first. And like I said, before this, I Googled SMA and I said, well, as long as it's not this, I'll be fine. We'll be fine, whatever it is, as long as it's not this. And I knew like signs that said if her tongue vibrates, then it's a good sign of SMA. So I was constantly looking at her tongue following up to that point, and I'm like, it doesn't vibrate, like I don't see it at all. So we get there and the neurologist was looking in her mouth and she goes, oh, I think her tongue's vibrating. And I just remember kind of like blacking out, sorry, blacking out and just thinking, no, like, not my baby. So I was like making up excuses for why her tongue was vibrating. It's vibrating, she's mad, like, and I just remember like, she just said, I'm so sorry, I think your baby has SMA. And as a mom, I'm Googling everything. I'm looking for support groups on Facebook. They've been so helpful to us. And that's when I learned that there is not just one FDA approved medication, there are two. And one of them is actually a gene therapy, most expensive medicine in the world at the time. I think something else has surpassed it now. So she was 8 months old. 8 months old in 1 week exactly, because I remember exactly when dosing day was. September 6th, 2019, and we were at Cincinnati Children's Hospital, and she's the second baby dosed ever with Zolgensma that week. They had just done the first baby a couple days sooner. So we went there, and I was just nervous and like ready to get it over with, ready to start seeing improvement, ready to stop watching her deteriorate. It was probably 6 weeks after she was dosed. She was really upset when I was putting her to bed one night, but I still have the video. She just started barely wiggling her feet, and you wouldn't have noticed because it wasn't a crazy amount, but I took a video of it because I was just so excited that her legs were moving finally, even just the tiniest wiggle. So Aggie is 4. If she were not treated, there is a good chance that we would not even be here right now because she would not be alive. So in the grand scheme of things, like, yeah, she doesn't walk, she can't sit up by herself, but I mean, everything she's doing it's a miracle. Like it's good. Like I don't worry about her living a long, healthy life because I just feel it like she's going to.
This story reminds us what's at stake and why we cannot let our foot off the pedal for 1 second. We all bear responsibility of ensuring all patients get access to these therapies upon approval. And on that, I will turn it over to Dr. Marianne Hamilton-Lopez, Senior Research Director of Biomedical Innovation at the Duke-Margolis Center for Health Policy, who will speak on real-world solutions designed to improve access and coverage.
All right, good morning. Thank you so much for having me I know I'm coming from the DC area to give me any legitimacy. I grew up in Ohio, Mason, if you've ever gone to Kings Island. So I'm able to represent a bit. So I'm so thankful that you have me here today. As mentioned, I am representing Duke-Margolis, which is a health policy center. We're based both in Durham, North Carolina and Washington, D.C., which is where I reside. Next slide, please. We always have a lot of really big disclaimers we put before we start speaking. In large part, we're a health policy center. We work with a lot of different stakeholders, as you all do, and we think that's the only way you can get work done. But we also realize that you have to do a lot of work in a kind of pre-competitive space. So I'm not going to talk about anything that's not public. And so just wanted to put my disclosures up there. I assume that you all have read these and taken them to heart. So next slide, please. So as mentioned already here, the landscape is quite extraordinary for cell and gene therapies. We have around 2,000 in the pipeline. And as you can see, primarily the majority of those are in phase 2. So there's a lot of expectation that we're going to be seeing some cell and gene therapies coming to market. And I just want to pause here and you know, we've heard the patient story, and what is so important when we're talking about cell and gene therapies is there's always going to, it's always about kind of this mixture of real hope. And we're talking about a lot of patients and their families who have not seen anything available to them. And now they have the potential hope that there might be. Along with that, there's a lot of uncertainty and unknowns because we're talking about new, potentially disruptive kind of therapies. And I think when we often talk about these types of cell and gene therapy or what's novel, it's always kind of this balance between innovation and then the reality of cost and access. And so that's really where I'm going to be kind of highlighting throughout today's talk. But as you can see, oncology has the highest concentration right now of clinical trials, but it's really across the board what we're seeing with cell and gene therapies. Next slide. And not just development, we're also seeing an increase in approval. So we do a lot of work with the FDA, and then just in the last couple years, we've had 10 cell and gene therapy approvals with more expected. Many of these approvals are accepted for kind of a accelerated review. And so we are likely to see just an increased number of approvals over the next few years. Okay, this is where the conversation kind of sometimes stops. And so I'm going to ask you to look at this, but then we'll keep moving forward. This is just some of the costs that are associated with the products that are on the market today. And so when I say cell and gene therapies, these are therapies that have often one-time administration, and they also give the potential of a durable effect. Some even go as far as say curative effect. So when we're talking about, you have a chronic disease, you might have to take a medication for the rest of your life. These cell and gene therapies are saying, here's the potential that you could have one-time administration of a therapy, and then that's it. And you might have a durable or curative impact. They also come with extraordinarily high prices. And the way that our healthcare system is currently designed is we've got a drug manufacturer over here. We have a health insurer over here. I have I need to have a patient who needs something, insurance company, and they pay the manufacturer. It's very transactional, a fee for service. You get it done. You're kind of the more drugs you administer, that's how the payment is done. We're talking about a very high cost upfront payment that potentially could be the one-time administration. So you can see why these are something that everyone kind of needs to take a pause and think through, because they're different. And our healthcare system and the way we pay doesn't really change that well, and it might not be as adaptable as we're trying to think this through. So in addition to the high cost of the drug itself, the therapies are complex to administer currently. They often require extensive care coordination before, during, and after, and they are primarily administered within hospital settings, which would drive additional cost. So we're looking over here. We have a number of the approved drugs, the manufacturers, what they're meant to their indication, and the cost. And this is, like I said, this is where people stop, because they look and they say, "Oh my God, you want me to pay $500,000 up front for something?" This is where I can tell you where my job especially is really hard, because for some of us we might say, but a medical patient, if they're chronic, they're going to need much more than that over their lifetime of cost, right? We know that somebody will be paying much more if they have to take a drug for the rest of their life. However, we don't really think like that when we pay. And so we have a realization that these are very expensive to develop, they're expensive to get, and then they come with a very high price tag when they are here. Next slide. So why is that kind of a challenge? We have current payment system in the U.S. is designed to reimburse for chronic conditions. State Medicaid programs face particularly acute challenges, and when we're talking about high-cost treatments, and that's why I'm being asked more and more to speak with states as they're trying to think what are their options. And so you have certain things here. You have the mandates to cover products. You have balanced budget requirements. You also have limited tools here for mitigating budgetary impacts. Like private payers, you being states, state Medicaid programs are able to enter into outcomes-based contracts. For people who are not familiar with that term, these are these types of agreements where it's usually between an insurance company and a manufacturer, where they say we're going to tie the payment of the drug to whether or not it works. So we're going to say, does it have the outcomes you said it would do? If it does by this time, we'll give you more of the payment. So that's an outcomes-based contract. These have become more increased in use, both in the commercial payers, but also at states, although they're still very new and much to be learned. For one example here, Massachusetts Medicaid entered into an outcomes-based arrangement so that included evaluations and refunds over the course of 5 years. So, as I mentioned, these are still relatively new. We've been trying to research what the state's experiences have been. It's very limited, but we are starting to hear back from some states as they're trying to get these approved for use and then actually put them into implementation. Currently, states have to request permission, kind of additional authorities from CMS to engage in the value-based purchasing arrangement. And then so that's a whole process in itself. And then once they do get approval, they can move forward with the implementation, which is obviously a whole process in itself. So, and then we have a CMS. I won't go into Medicaid best prices, but I can follow up with that if anyone's interested in how that's applied. State Medicaid programs face particularly acute challenges, and when we're talking about high-cost treatments, and that's why I'm being asked more and more to speak with states as they're trying to think what are their options. And so you have certain things here. You have the mandates to cover products. You have balanced budget requirements. You also have limited tools here for mitigating budgetary impacts. Like private payers, you being states, state Medicaid programs are able to enter into outcomes-based contracts. For people who are not familiar with that term, these are these types of agreements where it's usually between an insurance company and a manufacturer, where they say we're going to tie the payment of the drug to whether or not it works. So we're going to say, does it have the outcomes you said it would do? If it does by this time, we'll give you more of the payment. So that's an outcomes-based contract. These have become more increased in use, both in the commercial payers, but also at states, although they're still very new and much to be learned. For one example here, Massachusetts Medicaid entered into an outcomes-based arrangement so that included evaluations and refunds over the course of 5 years. So, as I mentioned, these are still relatively new. We've been trying to research what the state's experiences have been. It's very limited, but we are starting to hear back from some states as they're trying to get these approved for use and then actually put them into implementation. Currently, states have to request permission, kind of additional authorities from CMS to engage in the value-based purchasing arrangement. And then so that's a whole process in itself. And then once they do get approval, they can move forward with the implementation, which is obviously a whole process in itself. So, and then we have a CMS. I won't go into Medicaid best prices, but I can follow up with that if anyone's interested in how that's applied. So when I wanted according to publicly available information, through 2019, state Medicaid programs have entered into value-based payment contracts for a number of different types of medications and treatment areas. Massachusetts has established an agreement that carves out for CAR-T from bundled payments, with their Medicaid program conducting ongoing monitoring of those treatments. And then multiple states have done something what we call kind of a subscription model, or some people call it the Netflix model, but that is one way that they're trying to be creative with purchasing drugs and allowing access. Here they did it for hepatitis C. So the state itself got almost to the pennies access to the drug for their Medicaid population and their incarcerated population. This happened in Louisiana and Washington, although Michigan is also exploring a similar model with the idea that everyone could have access, then we could potentially move on to getting these harder to reach populations. There's a lot to be better learned about the implementation of the subscription model, but it just shows how at the state level, this is where we're seeing the most innovation in different types of payment approaches. I think states are willing to try so many different strategies because they see what's ahead, and they want to make sure that they use everything that's in their toolbox so that they can provide cover but also deal with the financial impact. So I can stop here with this last slide. One of the things that we asked when we were thinking about what it means to know whether these work is to think about what are our measurement and data infrastructure mechanisms. So payers want to understand the clinical benefit. States have mentioned, at least to us, that there's a lot of difficulty in and aligning on performance measures. And so if you have a drug and it's supposed to be transformative, how do we know that it works long term? Do we here as a state have the capacity to follow those patients, to understand kind of what different measurements would show that this is an outcome that we all think is the right outcome? So that's something to keep in mind, especially as the cell and gene therapies become more regular. Also, to date, a lot of the cell and gene therapies have been targeted and developed for very rare populations. I think in the back of all of our mind is kind of, this is expensive and manageable now when we're talking about maybe just a couple of patients, even within a state, if it's so rare. We don't know what we will be seeing in the next few years as far as, when we're talking about novel technologies, and why it's so important to be having these discussions now is whether or not we will see that type of innovation in bigger populations. Will there be one day durable impacts for cancer or for Alzheimer's, or for heart disease, and I think as a nation especially, we have this great desire to have. We want the treatments, and we love the innovation. And when there's someone that you see in your family that is suffering, you will pretty much move mountains to make sure you have access to those therapies. But I think we need to have a broader discussion, whether it's for, as a states, whether it's small insurers, but just as a system, like how we can put in the right kind of measurements to know whether these products are working, whether we have the right payment mechanisms so that we can think differently about how these products can be covered, so that we can make sure that there's access for the patients, that when these products are actually here, they are able to receive them and kind of have and actually realize this hope that they've been holding for so long. So with that, I can stop at my slides, but I'm happy to answer any questions. So, and I know that there's some manufacturer partners who would love it if you could jump in if you have better answers than this, but you're right, absolutely. All of the products that are approved have gone through extensive years of clinical trials. And I think the question then is, what happens after that? And for those particular patients that went through those clinical trials, how are they monitored, and for how long afterwards? And I know that there's kind of a FDA has, I don't know if it can be mandated kind of as a 15-year follow-up, but there's certainly an expectation that there's going to be a follow-up of those patients. And it's a great question, in part because a lot of people wonder, whose job is it really to do this data collection? Is it going to be the manufacturers? Are we going to rely on the payers to do that? Is that going to be insurance companies? Is it going to be the government? I've been in meetings where everyone's kind of like, no, it's not me. And so then you're kind of wondering, is it going to all fall on the manufacturers, and for how long? But that's one of the questions we need to figure out.
I'm worried about the patients themselves.
Yeah.
Who's going to represent them in all this transactions and make sure everything is done as it should be?
Absolutely.
Because as we know,
Yeah.
things happen.
They do.
And so I just wonder how, all this is going to come about, because I know that, we're in this to make people feel good, but I'm not about this. We're here to make money.
Right.
So in between all of that, who's to ensure that it happens in the proper way? I mean, the state can do only so much.
Right.
Can I take a stab at that? So this is a conversation that we're having in the advocacy community. Okay.
Keep talking.
Okay. I can't hear a difference, sorry. So this is going to be an all hands on deck effort for a lot of reasons. One thing we are doing better at is aligning clinical documentation when patients go to their provider with the clinical outcomes to determine whether a drug is actually working or not post-dosing. It is a heavy lift to do disease by disease, but the technology is there, it's expensive, but we are making headwinds into that. I definitely think it's something that we have to keep talking about. We can't, it's not sustainable to expect every disease community to do, patient advocacy community to do. Also keep in mind that many of these, I think most of these therapies right now are for rare disorders that require patients to get comprehensive specialized care. And so those clinics where a lot of these patients are seen know how to collect that data. Mm-hmm. And so I think we just got to keep connecting the dots with all stakeholders to make sure that we're doing that properly.
So I think that we look right now at the rare diseases because that has been where the cell and gene therapy therapies to date are there, and they have so much around. As you mentioned, there's very strong kind of amount of care already there. There's established communities, there's registries. So there's when we talk about cell and gene therapies, that's where we have seen the most advancement and kind of what has been approved and done to date. And there's a lot to be learned when we're talking about, because these are small numbers. When I say we, I'm talking about if we're looking at it from a someone who's trying to learn from this. What can we learn from that the rare disease community can do because they have those numbers and they have a strong community and registries already intact. At the same time, you're absolutely right. We expect a sickle cell gene and cell therapy, pretty soon. And that will have a larger population and new complexities because it will be about who will have access to that. There's how will that work? Will that be primarily Medicaid populations, which it likely is for the sickle cell populations that are most affected, and there's going to be a new set of questions that we might have to establish as well. And so I don't know if I can go back, but I didn't go through I had a few more slides about how cell and gene therapies are being addressed both by commercial payers and Medicare. So they are both. Everyone's going to be having a component. When I said that it's Medicaid, it's the sickle cell and the states themselves that have been coming to us the most. They always come with sickle cell on their mind and say that this will be kind of the biggest impact on our Medicaid. But I think it will be also kind of have impact across both Medicare, whether or not people are in the disability category. But what were you going to say?
So for those rare diseases that aren't disabling in children, they won't have access to Medicaid like if they did if their rare disease is a disabling disease. And I think the last time I heard, but correct me, 85% of all rare conditions are genetically based. So there's that. Medicare will be involved, but Medicaid, like my son qualifies for Medicaid through the disabling nature of his disease. If it wasn't disabling, there would be no qualifying level of need for him. So that would not be available to him. So diseases like hemophilia that have had treatments around for a while, used to be disabling. If you can get them on treatment, you keep them on treatment, it's no longer disabling. So that's kind of the best, I think, comparison I would use.
That's a good comparison.
I just want to add one quick thing too, because I know people are going to start heading to committees and such. One key takeaway from this presentation and some other things that I've seen over the last year being in this role is that since Ohio is a place where these innovative treatments are being created, we also need to be a place where they're accessible to Ohioans. I think it gives Ohio an opportunity to be a leader across the country if we can be a destination for individuals who know that they can be here, they can live here, and they have access to these treatments, they can afford these treatments. It will have tremendous impact on our continued economic prosperity if we can figure that out. So again, one key takeaway: if we're going to create this stuff, let's figure out how to make it accessible as well.
We need some data to make some important decisions like that. I don't know that I'm the most appropriate to answer the budgetary question, but I will assure you that I will be knocking on your doors and talking about this at some point. But it's important to remember that right now, specialty drug costs, which a lot of these therapies are under the specialty drug category in many health plans, the benefit designs. But we know state Medicaid programs that actually track rare or orphan products, it's only about 2% of their overall Medicaid spend right now. Like Dr. Lopez says, we expect that to increase. So I think we need to track, I've been very outspoken about the fact that when you fold orphan drugs into the overall specialty drug category, we don't get the appropriate data I think that we need in order to determine budget impact. But then, I'm not an expert on any of that, but I will say that that data is desperately needed, and we are working with state Medicaid programs across the country to say, extrapolate those numbers out from the specialty drug category, which is increasing at a rate that we're not seeing in orphan product coverage. If that makes sense.
We can track down some examples.
It was less than 1% in Michigan.
Okay, in Missouri, theirs is 2%. We've seen this across the board. Where there is data available, it hasn't been over 2% of any Medicaid program budget. But that's obviously going to change as more approvals come through the pipeline.